Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Creativity, Spirituality, and Making a Buck podcast with David Nichtern on the Be Here Now network. My name is Michael Cameras, your host and monologist. On behalf of all of us at Be Here Now and Dharma Moon, we sincerely hope this podcast finds you as well as can be, and we are grateful that you are joining us. Here at CSM, our guide David Nichtern discusses how to lead an integrated life involving spiritual practice, creative expression, and right livelihood with guests who embody and manifest these principles in their own life. And for this episode, we are very fortunate to have mindfulness meditation teacher, author, and mentor Kaira Jewel Lingo on the podcast. She was a longtime student of Thich Nhat Hanh who carries on his message and practice of peace and an engaged Buddhism. So with all the violence, heartbreak, and grief currently in the world, this episode seems particularly timely. Before getting into Kaira Jewel's brief bio to set up the episode, we would like to encourage everyone to head over to dharmamoon.com and check out our upcoming events and programming, which include a 6-week Buddhist studies course with Ethan Nichtern entitled Warrior in the World, The Path of Complete Engagement, a course exploring the Buddhist view of karma with David Nichtern and Larry Mermelstein, as well as our monthly community meditation gathering, which happens on the third Sunday of every month. And these podcasts are evergreen, so if you're listening to this down the road sometime, just head over to dharmamoon.com and there will be events up. Also, we would like to express our gratitude to the Be Here Now network for post-production and distribution of this podcast on their network. We encourage everyone to head over to BeHereNowNetwork.com to check out their ever-expanding library of podcasts imparting knowledge from the world's wisdom traditions. Okay, that's it for promo stuff. Now we'll get to Kaira Jewel's bio to provide some context for this episode. Kaira Jewel Lingo is a Dharma teacher with a lifelong interest in spirituality and social justice. Her work continues the engaged Buddhism developed by Thich Nhat Hanh, and she draws inspiration from her parents' lives of service and her dad's work with Martin Luther King Jr. After living as an ordained nun for 15 years in Thich Nhat Hanh's monastic community, Kaira Jewel now teaches internationally in the Zen lineage and the Vipassana tradition, as well as in secular mindfulness at the intersection of racial, climate, and social justice, with a focus on activists, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, artists, educators, families, and youth. Based in New York, she offers spiritual mentoring to groups and is author of We Were Made for These Times, 10 Lessons in Moving Through Change, Loss, and Disruption. She is also the co-author of the forthcoming Healing Our Way Home, Black Buddhist Teachings on Ancestors, Joy, and Liberation, coming February 2024 from Parallax Press. Her teachings and writings can be found at www.kairajewel.com. Kaira would like us to let everyone know she is co-teaching a retreat at Spirit Rock Retreat Center entitled Spiritual Radicals, Engage Spirituality from Buddhist and Christian Saints and Bodhisattvas, Saturday, December 9th, 2023. It is available in person and on Zoom. All right, folks, that's it for our introduction. We hope everyone listening is taking the best care of yourselves that you can. We're all on the field together, and may we all do our best to tend to the part of the garden that we can touch. And now, it is our pleasure to share with you episode number 47 of the CSM podcast, We Were Made for These Times, with Kaira Jewel Lingo.
So welcome, everybody, back to the Creativity, Spirituality, and Making a Buck podcast. And today we are graced with the presence of Kaira Jewel Lingo, who is a Buddhist, I'm going to say, priestess, a teacher, an activist, somebody who's been affiliated with the Thich Nhat Hanh Sangha for many years and other communities of practice. And she was intriguingly a nun for 15 years. Is that right?
Yes.
Buddhist nun. So hats off on that. And we're going to want to hear about that. But just first of all, Kaira Jewel, welcome to the podcast. We're happy to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Good to be with you.
So, we have a saying in my community, first thought, best thought. Have you ever heard that? Yeah. So
Yes.
first thought was none. That's a kind of, by most people's standards, probably a radical choice, lifestyle. And do you feel comfortable talking about that part of your life? I'm intrigued by it personally.
Yeah. Sure. Just whatever comes up.
Yeah.
First thought. Yeah. Well, I ordained when I was 25. I had gone to Plum Village for the first time when I was 23, like right out of college, and wasn't expecting to become a nun. I just wanted to learn how to be happy, and I wanted to find a spiritual teacher. And as the more I really absorbed the teachings and practiced with the community, the more I thought, oh, this feels so right. And so I lived there for a year and then ordained when I was 25.
In France?
Mm-hmm. In Plum Village Monastery. And so it was a very beautiful life. It has its ups and downs for sure, mainly created in my own mind. But it was a very wonderful training ground for transforming suffering and learning how to take better care of myself and be a better friend to myself. And it was, such a communal practice. Like some traditions are more silent and solitary, and this was definitely collective practice. So you were bumping your rough edges against other rough edges all the time and kind of getting smoother through relational practice. And a lot of emphasis on, wise speech and deep listening and looking out for the good of the whole, resolving conflicts with some skill. So it was a very international, multicultural community. So that made it, also very complex. And
were there any kind of unique teachings on conflict resolution, which I have felt over the last number of years is kind of almost the most potent form of Dharma we could bring into this place at this time? Did you think they had some special kind of insight about conflict resolution? And could you share some of that with us, if so?
Sure. I think one of the things that is unique from the Plum Village tradition is the understanding that we need a regular practice of just maintenance of our relationships, which is, in our case, it was every 2 weeks we would practice what's called beginning anew. And we would sit in a circle with fresh flowers in a vase in the middle. And the first part of the practice was just flower watering, was a metaphor for expressing our appreciation for each other. And we always did that. You couldn't ever skip that. That might be the only thing you would do, but you would never skip that. And then another thing that we could do in that beginning anew practice was express our regrets. So to look back at the past 2 weeks and say, I was unmindful in this situation, and I think I may have caused harm. I'm really sorry, or I haven't been able to be, present in the way I would like to be because this is happening, and I'm sorry. So it's a chance to express and release those things, because even, it's not just when anger or resentment is accumulating in us that we have, ruptures, but also when regrets accumulate in us, we find our way to hide more and more, in a relationship. So to clear all that out, we start fresh, and then we can really give ourselves to the relationships in the community. So those would be usually the two main things that would happen. We would share our appreciations, our regrets, and sometimes we would also share, hey, this is a difficulty that I'm having in my life that people wouldn't necessarily know, so that the community could be more supportive and people wouldn't take it personally. So someone might say, this is a long-term difficulty I'm having. My parent is sick at home and I'm trying to be supportive, and and then the community can offer, support in a different way than if they don't know that. So,
would everybody be in a circle at that point, or was it a particular group, or it was the whole group? How did you break it up?
So we lived, nuns and monks separately, but in the same, it was all the same practice center, but there was separation. So the nuns would do this with the nuns, the monks with the monks. If there were lay people visiting us in the monastery, they could join us, or sometimes it would be a lay beginning a new circle, a monastic. So it depended, but generally those who lived together were expected to do this every 2 weeks.
And how many people would that be? That could be a large group.
It could. I mean, when I first went there, we were small, so we were maybe 20 sisters. So, but then we grew over the years, and then sometimes there would be 60 sisters. And so sometimes we might do beginning anew in our cooking team, the group that you would do the cooking rotation with, or you might do it with your the group you ordained with, or something like that. So there would also be times we could change up how we gathered, but in general, it was the whole community.
It's so lovely sounding and almost idyllic in terms of the level of cooperation and inclusion, in terms of everybody being, by virtue of being admitted into that circle, somebody who's open to and willing to self-assess and also be part of a process like that. So how would you extrapolate that into communities in which maybe A, they don't have that kind of training, and B, there's maybe historical hostilities or strong antipathies, and the people do not have this inclination to practice together in this way? Is there like a 220 volt version of this for the kind of hot world that we live in?
Yeah. Well, let me just tell a story that's connected to this, and then I can answer that. So about, I think 4 times in a row in Plum Village in the summer, there was a group of Israeli and Palestinian people that came together to practice there. And it was a huge undertaking just to get the Palestinians there. But it was a group effort also involving many Israelis who really wanted to practice peace with their Palestinian counterparts. And so they would come for about 2 weeks. And the first week, they would all just practice. They wouldn't talk to each other. There was no gathering. They would follow along our program of meditation every morning, a Dharma talk from Thich Nhat Hanh. This was the summer retreat, so it was a month long. And then walking meditation in silence, 1,000 people walking through, the plum trees and the, roads of France. And then, deep relaxation in the afternoon and a Dharma sharing in their own language. There were facilitators that could guide in their own language. And after that whole first week, just practicing, the second week was deep listening, just between the Israelis and Palestinians. And there were facilitators. And so the first day, one group would just share their suffering. The next day, the other group would just share their suffering. And you could only listen when it was the other group. You couldn't respond. And then slowly, people began to see, the other side also has suffering. And they began to connect more deeply and, take each other's hands in walking meditation. And they formed a meditation sangha that I think continues until now, where they practice mindfulness together. This was 2004, I think. That's almost 20 years. So that kind of approach of, with a group that's really hot and there's a lot of conflict, there's a lot of inflamed emotions, bringing the nervous systems into co-regulation through whatever means, whether it's singing or meals or, something that can get us into our parasympathetic nervous system response. And maybe somewhat separate first, and then slowly, gently coming together in a way that's very held, so that people can begin to see the humanity of the other side, but also feel like they are being received in their full humanity, that the other side is willing to listen, is willing to understand them. So that's kind of how I've seen it work.
Would you say, obviously that's a controlled environment,
For sure.
in which you can create a mandala, boundaries, a sense of joint inspiration, joint aspiration. It just seems like at the front edge of that, of that energetic field, when there's really serious conflict, and you don't have access to creating a controlled environment, how would you even be able to? How can we move towards an environment in which there's some possibility of dialing down the nervous systems? How do you even get there from the kind of million-degree furnace, volcano erupting kind of energetic field? How would you get there? Do you have any ideas about that?
Yeah. I think there are people who both groups trust, like finding people. And this is why spiritual practice is so important, because there are people, and they don't have to be spiritual teachers or leaders. They just have to be people with integrity, who are compassionate, who are loving, who are solid, who are grounded, who, a mensch, someone who is, trustworthy implicitly, And so I think, people who have maybe been nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize, or people who have shown through their life's work that they are, deeply, deeply loving, deeply wise. Those kind of people can create a kind of field of care, a field of trust. Also, I'm thinking of nature, of just how powerful and healing places of the earth are, and what would it mean to try to, call upon those healing qualities in a place to hold such a process of reconciliation, or just even deep listening. I'm also thinking of the story of Jimmy Carter, who helped to really bridge the divides, I think it was between Israel and Egypt in the 80s. And the story, as I heard it, was everything was falling apart, and it was like the last day or two of the peace talks. And Jimmy Carter went to one person and talked to them, the leader, was it Sadat? Yeah. And got a picture of him and his family, and brought that picture to, I can't remember the name of the Israeli prime minister at that time, and then did the same the other way. And that made all the difference. And then the next day they were able to go forward and really come to a peace accord. But it was that act of showing, hey, these people have families that they love. They are family men. They are, connecting them on that very human level. So a place, people that can hold that kind of process. And I can't emphasize enough how important third-party actors are in this, because I know such a big part of where we are right now in so many conflicts in the world is all the other interests that are sort of fighting proxy wars or, conflicts through the two groups.
Right.
And so, like, as much as possible, figuring out how not to have that be really infiltrating and messing with the process.
So you also, are invested in social activism, and do you think, the same principles are underlying all the way through all the work that you do? I mean, you're presenting from a kind of very benevolent, compassion-driven, and also a tradition that really has developed some techniques and methods for deepening and connecting with oneself more, connecting with others more. But if you're out in the, let's say nobody knows you're a Buddhist meditator, and you're entering a field of social activism, which you're trying to affect change to either the culture or the specific situation. Is there a language that we could find that would be like almost less colored by the Buddhist perspective and the kind of well-being community, and like you could get in there and you'd stop their mind in some way, and shift the energy of a situation? I mean, I know that's a real powerful thing to ask, but I'm just wondering what your experience has been there.
Yeah. Well, from what I've been hearing from friends and colleagues who are very very much involved in various social change movements and organizations, there's quite a reckoning happening in social justice movements at this moment, where I know COVID hit a lot of organizations really hard. Someone who was an activist in a national organization said probably 40% of we're at 40% power at this point because of COVID. And so I've also heard that there's a lot of unhealth in infighting and breaking down of coalitions, or that there's, that's human, that's natural, that's happening all the time everywhere. But I think there is we're at a moment where folks in social justice circles are starting to ask questions of how can we do this in a way that's actually more successful? Because when we do have that ability to be self-reflective, and not only individually, but as an organization, to question our motivations, our intentions, to review and evaluate our strategies working. When we have that kind of ability to stop and take stock, the work is much more effective. And there are many examples of this, of social justice activists who, when they incorporated more, you could say, spiritual practices, or you could just say, you don't have to call them spiritual, but grounding practices in their work, they noticed their work began to be much more successful. First of all, because it affected their interpersonal relationships, their ability to work together well within their organization. But then it rippled out to, so I think, the writing is on the wall for many people that there needs to be inner work for outer work to really have an impact.
Yeah, it's we have our platform called Dharma Moon, and this particular podcast is based on a book I wrote called Creativity, Spirituality, and Making a Buck, which it's a light touch, but the intention is to kind of decrease the divide between the spiritual domain and the so-called secular world, which I found over the last 50 years of being involved with spiritual communities and highly secular communities like the entertainment business, which is very secular in its own way. How do you bridge? And in a way, you're summing it up by saying the inner work and the outer work. That's an interesting, simple way to approach. Are you working on an inner level, or are you interactively working? And that, could you harmonize those two elements?
Mm.
So I tell people who work for Dharma Moon, we have a staff, and I say, this is the advanced course right here, because having been in a number of sanghas, and you see people who portraying this kind of maybe somewhat idealistic universe, and then they're like, trying to figure out how to get a car full of people from one place to another, and all of a sudden all the kleshas are firing and burning at a level that you go, wait a minute, I thought we were supposed to be Dharma people. So in the tradition I come from, the kleshas firing and burning is the ground of the transformation. It's not the instead of it part. That's
Yes.
when you really can
Yes.
get to see what's going on.
Yeah.
So
Mm.
for that reason, for example, I didn't make Dharma Moon a nonprofit. I took that begging bowl aspect away, that we have to appeal to people who have great karma and have a lot of money, and that they support the people who can't get their stuff together and and afford to pay for a program. Like bringing those poles closer together, so that everybody can become a manifestor at some level, everybody can become a leader at some level, everybody can be a good student at some level, and that if one person drops, the next person's ready to fill in. It's not like you lose a charismatic leader or something like that. A lot of the spiritual communities, they lose a charismatic leader, the whole thing falls apart very quickly. So we're talking on any level you want to about any of those kind of issues. We're just getting to know each other. But so, is this your livelihood? What you do with the Dharma? Are you a professional Dharma teacher? Is that your gig?
Never used that word professional, but it is my work. Yes.
Yeah. So have you you've had to think about, like, coming from a volunteer and monastic community, have you had to think about, well, how do I deal with that aspect of charging for my classes and my workshops?
Yeah, that was a huge learning curve for me. Not only did I spend 15 years as a nun, but my first 14 years of life was in a monastic oriented lay community. It was a Christian family religious order that was sort of modeled on monastic values. And
did you grow up in that community?
I grew up, it was like a kibbutz. I was like, I only saw my parents once a week for dinner. I mean, for a meal. I saw them in the morning, and sometimes they put me to bed at night, but there were other adults who were assigned to taking care of the kids. So the parents were all doing, human development work, and it was international.
And what ages was that for you? How old were you?
Birth, I was born into that community.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Until I was 14.
That's a unique childhood for sure.
It really was. And it kind of, set me up for monastic life pretty well. I think one person in our community said she was a child monk, not by choice, but anyway, that's what it was. So in that community, we owned everything in common. We didn't have, personal property. We shared everything, and the cars were owned in common. If we needed a car, we had to sign it out, and hand-me-downs and very little money. So we would get a stipend. So very similar to monastic life. But basically most of my life until I was 40 was involuntary simplicity, either because my parents chose that for us or because I chose it when I was an adult. So then at age, 40, to find myself out of robes and needing to make a buck, I was, it had been kind of rammed into my subconscious so deeply that to charge money was not spiritual. That I had to go through many steps to, feel comfortable charging. And I, had to kind of undo some of that patterning, that it was bad to say, hey, this is how I value my time. you know, if you want me to be here, this is what I need to support myself, you know. But eventually I was able to do that. And and it's not like it's all figured out. There's still times where and I do things by donation. Plenty of my work is by donation.
Mm-hmm.
And some of it is on sliding scale, which is sort of, in between. And and I really try to practice generosity, to offer myself when I can. There are times I don't charge at all, or get paid very little, because it's something I really believe in and want to support. And then there are times when you're not expecting much, but a lot of generosity comes my way. And so, it feels like a bit of a mysterious way that things happen. But I think for me, what I've really, begun to trust is that I am going to have what I need. And if I don't need much, which as a nun, as a young person growing up in this community, I didn't need much, and I had what I needed. And now I've chosen this householder life where, there's a house, there's a car, there's a dog, there's lots of expenses, and I need more. And more is coming to me. I'm working for it. I'm charging for it in some cases. But it's like this feeling of, it's not about the money. It's about, am I doing what I'm here to do? Am I in alignment with my purpose? And when I am, I'm taken care of. And it may not be through a dollar sign. It may be through friendships. It may be through other forms of generosity. And so I don't just count, the dollars. I count, all the ways in which I feel life is holding me.
Yeah. So, one of the chapters in my book is called Defining Success on Your Own Terms, which it sounds like you've done.
Yeah.
You're not just buying into a notion of that's externally rotated. When they say in yoga, it's like external rotation or internal, a lot of us are externally rotated. We're really looking outside of ourselves for any kind of feedback or satisfaction. Did you write a book about your experience?
I did.
What's it called? You have it right there?
I don't have it right here, but it's called We Were Made for These Times, 10 Lessons in Moving Through Change, Loss, and Disruption.
And so say it again, just so everybody can kind of wrap their mind around the title. Yeah.
We were made for these times, 10 lessons in moving through change, loss, and disruption.
And so you've identified 10 different sort of distinct particular approaches. So what's number 8?
Oh, I have to. Well, the first one is coming home to ourselves.
That's number 1?
Yeah. The second one is resting back into the unknown.
Okay. Any of them is okay.
Yeah,
I know how this is. You move on from something like that.
Yeah, it's been a while. But there's weathering strong emotions, weathering the storms, taking care of our strong emotions. Those are 2. Another one is equanimity and letting go. I think that might be 8. Another one is practicing with the 8 worldly winds. There's nurturing the good.
So you're obviously Thich Nhat Hanh is your main teacher, is that correct?
Yeah.
And what and you spent time with him personally?
Yes.
So this is a great gift, would you say?
Such a great gift. Oh my goodness.
It's like we have this story in the Kagyu lineage of Tibetan Buddhism where one of the lineage holders was asked, do you want to prostrate to the mandala of the guru or the guru themselves? and it prostrated to the mandala, which was a mistake. So when you have a human being who's embodying these principles, and you have access to that person, which in this case, obviously, such a weathered, seasoned bodhisattva, is as rare as you can get. So anything you want to say about him that comes to mind?
Yeah.
You know what we call it, crying to the guru from afar. You can just reach out across time and space and just say whatever you want.
Yes. Well, I feel so grateful, and it's like a blessing that's just like in every cell of my body for the rest of my life. That's how I feel. But he poured himself into us. He absolutely poured himself into us. And he loved us so deeply. I could cry. He took refuge in us too. We didn't just take refuge in him. I remember one winter retreat. This was the Rains retreat. We would always begin by prostrating to him, our teacher, and making the vow to stay in place for those 3 months. And he would offer us his blessing, his support. But one year he prostrated to us, and he asked us for forgiveness, and he asked us to please guide him and, help him if he was, done anything that hurt us. It was just the most touching thing. But he just loved us so much. And he always was saying, no one person is going to continue me. The whole Sangha is my continuation. And he set it up like that, and it has worked. The Sangha, more people come now to all of the centers than when he was alive and teaching. And so there's this very beautiful, he was so skillful in seeing what will help this continue and help as many people as possible. And it's by really infusing in the community the understanding that guru and student are not separate. Buddha and disciple are not separate. That we all have awakened nature. We all can transform, and the community is the Buddha. The community is the teacher. That we together create this force field that is so powerful because we're not operating as individuals.
Yeah, I mean, it seems as a skillful means that he chose that to, and you hear this about it, but the Sangha would be the lineage holder. It's something that, the different times, different people handle different ways. But I hear you to be saying there's no formal lineage holder or transmission of the kind of the person who's responsible for holding his heritage together. It's
well, there's hundreds of Dharma teachers that he's transmitted the lamp to, probably thousands at this point, monastic and lay. But yes, there's no one leader of the Sangha that takes over from Thai as the head of the organization. It's all the Dharma teachers, all the bhikkhu, bhikkhunis, all the lay sanghas.
And is Kaira Jewel a name that he gave?
So Kaira is the name my parents gave me, but when I was a nun, I was called Sister Jewel, or True Adornment with Jewel. And so when I disrobed, I wanted to keep the name he gave me, so I combined it with my birth name.
Yeah. It's so positive, the refuge names. And, I never heard a refuge name that was like, mud-soaked nutcase of lack of empathy or whatever. So it's an interesting thing that I think people might, in some cases, not understand that the basic message in Buddhism is not nihilistic. It's extremely positive in terms of basic goodness or Buddha nature, that everybody has it. It's hard to recognize sometimes, that's for sure. That's challenging. And that's very moving to me. Thank you for sharing that sense of, because over the, I started studying this in 1970. I don't think you were even born then, were you?
No, I wasn't. I came
Okay.
along a few years later.
So, my son was born in 78. So you're probably in that generation somewhere.
74. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and it's interesting, you're in an intermediate generation where a lot of the impact happened, and then there's a younger generation now that is very interesting to me personally. So at Dharma Moon, we have a lot of young people, which is cool by me. I'm a musician. I'm a professional musician.
Lovely.
I like having young energy around. We sort of made this kind of nice connection with this guy, Duncan Trussell, who's a comedian and podcaster. So we've got a lot of hipster kind of characters floating around, and talented, creative people. But there's been several generations, and I'm, not an archivist of it, but I'm, enough curious about like the evolution of this, ranging right back from people like that coming to the West in the first place. There was nothing when I was growing up. Buddhism was like, you read Siddhartha or something like that. There was, and now it's, the seeds of it are everywhere in the West. I would say it sort of diverged into a kind of secular offshoot with the apps and the, the kind of, not wanting to engage the sort of traditional and also culturally different envelopes of it. But what would you see as the next iteration? What do you think coming up? If you could take out your crystal ball and look, what would you see?
I feel like I know where I feel my edge, and many people that I'm connected to. It's our planet. I mean, we don't have much time at this point. And towards the end of Thai's teaching life, that was his main focus, was ecology and climate change, and the inner transformation again that needs to happen, this real recalibrating of our own relationship to the earth, so that collectively we could have the collective awakening. For me, it has to be about a collective awakening, about beyond Buddhism. It's not about Buddhism at this point. It's about humanity waking up in time to have some kind of future. Nothing like, I'm sure, what we live now, but so I think for me it's about, what do we really want for life on this planet?
I'm sure you have have so many different kinds of friends, but the ones who are extremely well read about the ecological system, that, like, I consider myself a kind of like gazing over the fence. I'm trying to learn everything I can. But some people have had the bandwidth to really go deep into it. And I got a phone call from a friend of mine like that I think it was about 9 to 12 months ago. And he said, "We're done. It's over." And I have to take it with a grain of salt. You take whoever delivers the message, you factor it into the message itself. But this is somebody extremely well read and literate about this. And so we passed the point of no return. Do you have any feeling like that about the science aspect of it?
Well, I also have have heard many folks saying, collapse is basically unavoidable at this point. Now, what that means is still, I think, somewhat in our hands. Definitely, we are past the point. I mean, 75% of the ice in the Arctic has melted. We would be in trouble with 10% of the ice melting, and that's not coming back. Not anytime, in eons. And so I think, there's this book, Hospicing Modernity. There's this sense of hospicing modernity, this sense of we have to go into hospice mode. Like, how do we take the best care of something that's, on its way out, in a sense? But I think for me, an image that I find helpful is if you think of humanity being on a plane, all of humanity, and the plane is not going to reach its destination, it's either going to nosedive, or if people on the plane see what's happening early enough, they can have a gradual descent, a more graceful descent than a nosedive, because we're in denial that the plane can't stay in the air. So I think that's where we're at. We are going to, many structures are going to collapse. I mean, we're seeing it already. I think COVID is sort of a preview of the breakdowns that are coming. But if we start to really turn our awareness to that, and there are many groups and things that are doing that. I mean, Holland just had a court case where they decided to divest from fossil fuels as a country. I mean, that's huge. There are many things like that that are happening. People are waking up. And I think the more that can happen, the more we can save, the more we can use the resources and the capacities that we have now to build something potentially new out of the ashes that really can care for everyone. But if we continue business as usual, then we'll have very few options for any meaningful continued existence.
I like to think of meditating at the base of Mount Vesuvio or something like that, or Atlantis. What would you do if because there's another factor, which is the Buddhist thing is, in Japan, they say if you're having a wedding, you get a Shinto priest, but for a funeral, you get a Buddhist priest. They know how to handle that. And it's interesting. One of my dearest friends passed a couple of years ago, and we were in a band in college, me and him, and the third guy who is now like a fairly well-known Zen priest in the San Francisco area. And the three of us were not a rock band in college, but one of us, I'll leave the names out just to, I don't know how much exposure people would want or not want, but the Zen guy was so good with the body and sort of this, he was able to come in with the corpse and wash the body, and they're so grounded, the Zen people, in that way, so earthy,
beautiful. That's
and
beautiful.
So we say, that we know, and I'll just testify personally, the older you get, the more obvious impermanence becomes.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, in a way, Buddha was kind of a genius to get it at a very young age. You go, you look around, you go, well, what's that person over there? Oh, that's just grandpa. He's an old guy. It's normal. And he's going, wait a minute, that might be me in a while. So you have those thoughts. But right now, you begin to really see. My friend Mickey Lemley says they're firing at our regiment. You begin to see the engraved quality of that. And then you have to think about consciousness itself, whether, what do you really believe at the moment of death, even, or dissolution? What experience do you have of some kind of awareness, some kind of consciousness that is not simply a byproduct of a physical chemical reaction in the brain? And when I don't know, I have some new friends that are neuroscientists, Buddhists. You know anybody like that?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. Do you know Dr. Sarah King? Have you met her at all?
I know of her. I don't know that we've met. Yeah.
She was just on the podcast. We recorded one last week. But, when you have the knowledge about the function of consciousness at the highest level of the scientific paradigm, how would you put that together with some kind of leap or actual experience of consciousness that is not simply tethered to biological processes, chemical processes? So have you thought about that at all? It's like, where would you stand if push came to shove about what consciousness is or isn't? Sorry, that's a big question.
Well, I think it's definitely not the brain. It's not the same. The mind is not the same as the brain, because we know the mind is non-local. I mean, we know that we can have an impact on each other from a distance. How could we do that if our consciousness was just in our brain? So for me, it comes down to matter in the end is energy. And energy isn't limited by the limitations of matter.
So to have that understanding and to realize that you're in a world in which probably the very vast majority of people would not share that view. Even religious people would not necessarily. They might talk about soul or whatever, but the idea that that consciousness is some kind of field, is now many people would say no, it's a purely materialistic process, and it ends, at a certain point. So how religion has always carved out a space of looking at something beyond the obvious materialistic level of things. But we're in a materialistic universe, and that's almost one definition of a dark age, right? I mean, it's pure materialism.
And we do have access to quantum science, which, is, maybe a deeper dive than Newton. It's more true than Newtonian science, Newtonian physics. We have quantum physics, which has just gone deeper than the surface levels of Newtonian physics. And so we also have, scientific avenues to reach the same insights that are in spiritual traditions.
So the ice shelf melting could be viewed from the Newtonian physics point of view of like it's just a physical thing that's happened and it'll have certain causes and certain cause and effect to it. How would you view it as a quantum event? That means there are more possibilities, right?
I don't know. I would have to think about that. I think this larger perspective that nothing is created, nothing is destroyed, everything is just in a process of transformation. Maybe something else is going to come from that water that has melted from the Arctic. I mean, the Earth is extremely creative and brilliant in adapting. Not this quickly, usually. Usually the Earth needs a little more time to figure out new solutions. But I mean, who knows? Maybe there'll be some very beautiful other result of this ice melt that nobody can conceive of right now.
Yeah, it's quite a rich moment to be vividly present and alive in. Probably has always been the case as far as you could tell, but like just looking at my lifetime, something's coming to a head.
Yeah.
I was born right after World War II, which was like, can you imagine the world during that time? And it had personal repercussions, tribal, causal, all kinds of things. But from then on, there has been relative. I know there's warfare and there's all kinds. There has not been a world war since then. A global, a conflict that pulled everybody all in and pulled us out of our norms and stuff like that. And I'm just stating right here, I hope it never happens. One thing Trungpa Rinpoche said is we can avoid it. Our actions can avoid those things happening. It's not like predetermined or so. So I'm trying myself to pass along anything I might be holding in my backpack that people could use, younger people could use, and go like, we can do something with that. We can cook on that. And basically awareness practices like we learned in our Buddha places with our
Mm-hmm.
teachers,
Mm-hmm.
like mindfulness. We put pretty heavy emphasis on mindfulness practice at Dharma Moon, just getting
Mm-hmm.
you're grounded properly in that practice,
Mm-hmm.
sitting practice. And I don't know. Have you did Thai work with Lojong slogans at all? Was that part of the Mahayana path? The mind training slogans?
No, he didn't.
Yeah, but formal training in compassion.
Yeah.
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 So, anything you want to bring to the conversation? Let's take a minute and let people know where you're going to be when. How
Okay.
about that? Yeah.
Sure. So, you can always find out about what I'm doing on my website, just my name, kairajewel.com. And for those who identify as BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, People of Color, I lead a weekly meditation group Thursdays at noon Eastern through the Garrison Institute. And that's on my website. It's on the Garrison Institute's website.
Is that virtual though?
It's virtual. It's online.
Okay.
Yeah. So people join from all over the world. And then, yeah. And then I and my husband offer a Buddhist Christian monthly group, Buddhist Christian meditation and action community. And we offer teachings from both streams and small mentoring groups as part of that too. It's by donation. And then his name is Adam Bucko. He and I will offer a day long at Spirit Rock on Christian and Buddhist spiritual radicals. So, invoking the stories of a number of people in both of these traditions to inspire us on our.
When will that be?
That's December 9th.
Okay.
It's a 6-hour day long through Spirit Rock Meditation Center. So all that's on my website. I also have a monthly newsletter if people want to hear from me. I write a little reflection and then share what's coming up in the next month or so with resources. And then a new book is coming out that I've co-authored with 2 other Black women Dharma teachers in the Plum Village tradition, and that's coming out in February, called Healing Our Way Home, Black Buddhist Teachings on Ancestors, Joy, and Liberation. So it's a kind of conversational dialogue book. We just recorded our conversations over a few years during the pandemic, and they became chapters.
Is there an audio version of that book coming
out? Not at this time. I'm not sure. We haven't explored how we would do that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You'd have to be rereading your original recordings.
Yeah.
Well, listen, this is there's some kind of joy for me in connecting with people who are out there doing various pieces of this. There's some kind of whole happening.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a lot of sensing to understand the totality of it.
Mm-hmm.
But I just want to express my appreciation to you personally for the journey that you've taken, which I think a lot of people will resonate with, because in some ways you're a product of my generation. You were born into a kind of communal situation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if we can at Dharma Moon support you in any way, we would certainly want to do that.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
That's very kind.
Hopefully we stay in touch, and good luck with everything that you're undertaking.
Thank you so much. I really wish the same to you. Maybe I'll listen in on one of these Dharma Moon gatherings.
Yeah, you're welcome. And anything you want to join in on, you just let me know and we'll figure it out.
Okay. Thank you so much. Take good care, David.
And that concludes episode number 47 of the Creativity, Spirituality, and Making a Buck podcast on the Be Here Now network. We would like to begin this outro monologue by sending a deep, sincere, heartfelt thank you to Kaira Jewel for joining us on the show and for generously sharing her time, her experience, and wisdom with us and with all of you, our listeners. Also, we encourage everybody to head over to Kaira Jewel's website, kairajewel.com, pick up a copy of her book, and consider attending her retreat on December 9th, 2023. Also, huge thanks to everybody at Be Here Now for supporting and distributing this podcast. If you are listening and you enjoy this podcast, again, we encourage you to head over to BeHereNowNetwork.com to check out the ever-expanding library of podcasts emanating the world's wisdom traditions and also continuing Ram Dass's legacy of loving, serving, and remembering. Also, head over to dharmamoon.com. Are you like I used to be, listening about podcasts talking about meditation and spiritual practice without meditating yourself? Then I encourage you to join us at Dharma Moon and learn how to meditate. Meditate with us in community. It is a practice of peace, and peace is the way. Also, we encourage all of our listeners to like, subscribe, leave a comment, or leave a positive review for the podcast on whatever platform it is you are receiving this transmission from. It will greatly help us. And that's that, folks. Thanks for listening. It's our hope that this podcast supports you in your practice, that your practice supports you in life, and in turn, that helps you support others. All right. Thank you for listening. May you be safe, healthy, happy, and at ease. All the best.